Hello, and welcome to Rules of the Game, where we demystify the laws that govern nonprofit advocacy so you can push for change boldly and legally. New to advocacy? Start with the basics at afj.org.
I'm Susan Finkel-Sorless.
And I'm Tim Mooney. Ballot measures offer voters the opportunity to participate in direct democracy and provide nonprofit organizations with a powerful platform for educating the public about the issues they care about. Emma Olson Sharkey is a returning guest, previously with us in episode 96, Ballot Measure Insights, in January 2024, so it has been way too long, Emma. Emma is a partner at Allies Law Group and focuses her practice on nonprofit tax, voting rights, and campaign finance law. She advises clients participating in ballot measures and engaging in political and issue advocacy, voter registration, voting rights, and post-election activities. Emma is one of the country's leading ballot measure experts, and we are excited to have her back on the show. Emma, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, welcome, Emma. So why this episode? Why are we here? Why is this important? As you've probably heard, listeners, that California has an independent redistricting commission established to reduce partisanship in the process. It established the current congressional map in 2021 for the 2022 elections. And so, in response to what's been happening in Texas, to those redistricting maps that were just passed and signed, Governor Newsom of California and other proponents are asking voters to set aside those maps and engage in what's called as mid-cycle redistricting. This would allow the California state legislature to draw new congressional maps. The legislation that would allow the new maps to be drawn requires 2/3 vote in the legislature to pass. And that has happened. The California legislature passed and the governor signed the legislation Prop 50. Now the question is going to be presented to voters during a special election on November 4th, 2025.
So, Emma, we now know a little bit about what's going on, what is probably dominating your world, at least here in the late summer of 2025. Let's not get out of summer yet.
Sure.
Let's back up a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the history of ballot measures, specifically in this kind of a redistricting process.
Absolutely. So first of all, Tim and Susan, thank you so much for having me again. It is a delight to be here, even under these circumstances. I love talking about ballot measures and what we can do to make sure that process and that tool is used across the country. So thank you for allowing me to be here. And to your actual question, it's a good question. Practically, even taking a further step back, in the United States, the power of ballot measures was born during the 1900s, during the Progressive Era. And it was actually ushered in by populists, socialists, and labor activists who really wanted to engage in this activity and actually engage in direct democracy through persuading people on issues that they cared about. Early on, it was used to curb political corruption. It was used to improve social equality. And now, as you all know, is used in both the progressive and in the conservative space. And now, specifically for redistricting, we've seen this across the country. A number of states have redistricted or amended or altered their redistricting process through the ballot measure process. In Michigan, in Ohio, several times. Most recent one failed. Colorado. A number of states have done this successfully. And in most instances, it has made the process theoretically fairer for those engaging in the actual process.
So my question for you is, beyond ballot measures, is this process we're seeing now, this mid-decade redistricting, is that something that's new?
No, actually, it's something that a number of folks have done in the past, politicos. Tim, I think actually we spoke about this briefly beforehand. Do you want to share your anecdote?
For those of you who were back around in 2003, that was the first, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, attempt by any state to break from the tradition, which is to do this following the census, because that's when we have the best population data, the best information to be able to draw these districts appropriately or inappropriately, depending on your state. But back in 2003, there was a sense from Tom DeLay, who was Speaker of the House at the time, that, hey, we can actually redraw these things in a political gerrymander and get more Republicans out of Texas. Does this sound familiar in 2025? The answer is, of course it does. That's what we just experienced in Texas as well. So not only are we seeing that, and of course that was because there was a call from some in very high offices that may or may not be on Pennsylvania Avenue in the District of Columbia. They are engaging in these types of things to try to get other states to get more, in this case, Republicans in Congress ahead of an election where it may be very tight to determine whether or not they retain control of Congress. So we have a huge political overlay on all of this, but it's not new. This goes back a couple of decades.
Absolutely. And that's, from my experience, that is the first I have heard of it too, when DeLay did it in the early 2000s.
So, Emma, let's move this from redistricting to ballot measures and ballot initiatives, because the California redistricting is going up for a ballot measure in November, in a few months. How can 501c3 public charities participate in the ballot initiative process?
Yeah, so I guess first, to speak about the different types of 501c3s, first you have a private foundation, and generally they cannot engage in any type of lobbying unless they're taxed on it, essentially, which is what ballot measures activity is considered. It's lobbying for IRS purposes. And so practically, private foundations generally do not engage in direct advocacy on ballot measures. However, public charities, which are a lot of the organizations, the local organizations that are publicly supported, can do an insubstantial amount of ballot measure activity, i.e. of lobbying activity. And so practically what we see is that a number of ballot measure campaigns will be funded and supported by C3s in different ways, including their lobbying cap, essentially.
And just to drill down a little bit more, what is the distinction under the law between something that's allowed, hey, vote for Measure 9, versus something that is out of bounds completely? Supporting and opposing candidates could cause you to lose your tax-exempt status and a variety of other intermediate sanctions that are possible there too. What's the distinction there in the law? And we're going to get to why that matters in a second here, because this particular proposition might be melding a few of these things together.
Yeah, absolutely. So the IRS determines whether something is political based on their facts and circumstances test. And so it is a number of factors that you have to look at, which is generally why we encourage folks to talk to their lawyers about specific communications. But that will determine whether it's political. If it's lobbying, it really is, if you focus on, for ballot measure advocacy, vote yes on Prop A, vote no on Prop 10, is really the advocacy that you should stick to squarely stay within lobbying. When you're drilling down into your question a little bit more, when you start to talk about the ballot measure campaign and then talk about the party, for instance, or then talk about a candidate in particular that's on the ballot, that could create some additional concerns about, okay, is that communication actually political? Which is, again, why we recommend that folks generally talk with their counsel about these types of issues.
And not to put too fine of a point on this, this whole rigmarole, it sounds like something my grandmother would say, but we'll go with it, is in response to the partisan redistricting that happened in Texas. And that's what's pulling this partisan nature of this ballot measure in. If this were only just a ballot measure about, I don't know, a park bond or something like that, C3 public charity, there's almost no question that's going to be easily within the boundaries of what they can do. But because the very nature, and you're pinned in a little bit here, if you're going for a yes vote or a no vote, there's politics, and it's partisan politics that are all behind that. So I guess what I'm hearing from you is there may be space to maneuver for a C3, but if there is any, caution flag and seek legal advice. Is that kind of where we're at on this?
Absolutely. I would be thoughtful about what you say, what you don't say, and how it's framed within the communication, especially if you're going to bring any kind of candidates or parties into it. Talking about Democrats or Republicans or even officials like Governor Newsom may make it political, but that is, again, something that there's gray area here, which is inherent due to the facts and circumstances test, which is something that a lawyer that is trained in tax law should be able to help you with as you move forward.
This reminds me of the old game that I used to play when I was a kid, Operation. Did either of you ever play that game where you got the tweezers and you're trying to... I feel like that getting involved as a charity in Prop 50 absolutely is a game of Operation. Maybe there's a way to get that organ, that little plastic organ out, but the second you touch the side of that thing, the red nose is going to go. We're in an area that we need to be concerned about. There's my pop culture analogy for the pod.
And I will say another way to engage as a C3 is to do activity related to just encouraging people to go vote. That is another way that you can safely engage. Don't speak to one side or the other. That is just straight ahead C3 permissible, not even within your lobbying cap, which is a good way for organizations to engage.
And I just literally wrote a blog post that got put out today as we record this on National Voter Registration Day that speaks all about those things. So thank you for unintentionally plugging the piece that I just wrote.
That sounds like a great piece. I'm going to go read it.
Okay.
Let's switch over into a different lane. My favorite lane is 501c4s and labor organizations. Are there any unique circumstances here that would impact their ability to take a stance on Prop 50?
Yeah, so I would say generally 501c4s can engage in unlimited advocacy, including ballot measure activity. Again, you have to keep those same political lines involved, right? So if you are communicating about the ballot measure and then also talking about a political party, that could make it political. But generally, you have a lot more flexibility to engage from a 501c4. The other thing that I will caution folks on is that California is a highly regulated state. And so if you plan to engage in California, you should talk to an attorney, because otherwise the organization may fall into some traps. Even just contributing to another organization could trigger different types of registration, like major donor registration obligations. So we want to be thoughtful about that as you consider California.
Great.
Pivoting a little bit away from California, because we all probably could take a break because we know it's just going to be dominating our falls.
Are there other states than California?
There are other states in California, absolutely. And some of those states, thank you for the transition, Susan, some of those states have been doing things within the last few years to limit the ability of citizen-led organizations to have access to ballot initiatives and to get their issues before the voters. Can you talk a little bit about what has been going on and whether those types of efforts have succeeded or failed, and kind of where we're at here at the tail end of 2025?
Yeah, so this is something I track very closely, not only for my practice, just to be aware of the rules, but also because we regularly litigate these restrictions on behalf of clients. And so that is something that I am very familiar with. And I 100% agree. What we have seen first in 2016 was a huge jump in conservative legislators attempting to restrict the ballot measure process more consistently across the board. We're seeing it North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Missouri. Any state that has a ballot measure process has had a number of restrictions through legislation over the last decade, essentially. However, in the last couple cycles, so in the last 4 or 5 years, what we have seen is that this legislation that we've seen across the country, stopping, not actually passing, part of it will pass. We've actually seen a lot more of it pass recently in a number of states, including most prominently, in my view, Florida, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and then even just recently, not passed, they're going to consider it, is the Missouri special session, where they're both considering bringing all the worlds together, considering redistricting, mid-cycle redistricting, and then also considering restrictions on the ballot measure process as well.
So, Emma, as we wrap up here, is there any good news to share that we haven't covered?
So, one piece of good news, and hopefully we'll have more pieces of good news as we move forward with litigating a lot of these cases. Also happy to talk about those cases as we continue to have them. In South Dakota, there was actually a decision quite recently that basically allowed the circulation period to be longer than it was. It was 9 months, and then the court struck it down as unconstitutional because that circulation period as a right of the citizens, needed to be able to circulate the petition for a longer period of time, which, as compared to other states like Oklahoma that only has 90 days to circulate a petition, could be an interesting lawsuit at some point.
Hypothetically. Emma, thank you so much for catching us up on all the ins and outs, whether it's in California or South Dakota or Missouri. I'm learning a lot about Missouri lately, but we really appreciate you having on and would love to have you back whenever ballot measure stuff it becomes important, which is an every year thing. So we'll see you next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to come back.
Thank you, Emma.
We hope this episode helps make you a bolder advocate. Join us next time for more ways to maximize your advocacy and make positive change in your community.
We're much more than this podcast. If you've got questions, you can email boulderadvocacy@afj.org. You might even get one of us.
If you found the show helpful, please rate us on whatever app you're listening to so others can find us. For more resources mentioned on the show, plus the show notes for the podcast, visit afj.org. Thanks for joining. A Boulder Advocacy production.